Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, President Trump promised Americans during his campaign that if elected, he would lower costs on day one, and Americans trusted him to do so. Yet, all President Trump has done from day one of his presidency until now has been to raise costs for our families and our businesses. One of the most outrageous examples of this is with his erratic blanket tariffs that he's imposed on our allies and trading partners, as you've heard from my colleague from Delaware talking about. But let me be clear, these tariffs for the American public are nothing but taxes. Tariffs are taxes. That's what the American people are seeing every single day. And many of them are seeing it first thing in the morning when they have their cup of coffee. This is an unacceptable burden to be putting on the American people, and the tools this administration is using to do so are clearly unconstitutional. They're actually being heard in the Supreme Court today. The good news is Congress has the authority to do something about it. And there's bipartisan, bicameral agreement that we not only can we act, but we must. That's why I'm here today to pass the bill that I wrote with Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. It's called the No Coffee Tax Act. Very simple bill. It would roll back President Trump's tax on our coffee. Let me explain why this is important. The United States is the largest importer of coffee in the world. Why? Because even though we all love our morning coffee, the United States does not have the natural climate or growing conditions needed to produce the amounts of coffee Americans consume every day. 99% of the coffee in this country comes from another country. Until President Trump took office, Americans had never paid broad tariffs on coffee imports. But now this president has decided to recklessly impose these blanket tariffs on our top sources for coffee, Brazil at 50%. And other main coffee producers like Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia, Ethiopia are being tariffed outrageous rates. Now, I don't need to tell you what that's meant for Americans, because we've all felt it every single day. I'm hearing from my coffee roasters and wholesalers in Nevada who have been forced to raise their prices to keep up with these tariffs. That is filtering down to local coffee shops, our small businesses that are in turn having to raise their prices on consumers. The price of a cup of coffee has skyrocketed nearly 40% since last year. 40%. This is happening all over the country. And it's not just businesses where coffee is their main product. Restaurants that serve breakfast are being impacted as well. This is what these irresponsible tariffs have done to Americans, because, as I've said, tariffs are taxes. Now, I know that responsible, targeted tariffs on our adversaries can be good for American workers and our national security. There's a smart way to do this, however. Taxing our coffee and raising prices for Americans isn't it. The bipartisan, bicameral bill Senator Paul and I introduced would bring coffee tariffs back to the level they were at before President Trump took office, 0%. The Senate has already passed legislation supported by both Democrats and Republicans to repeal President Trump's tariffs on Canada and Brazil, as well as his global tariffs on the rest of our trading partners. So the no coffee tax is equally important to the American public. Prices are already too high in this country. Getting rid of this unnecessary coffee tax will make Americans' lives and their mornings just a little bit easier. For that reason, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of my bill, the No Coffee Tax Act, which is at the desk, that the bill be considered, read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
I recognize the senator from Idaho.
Thank you. Reserving the right to object. I rise in opposition to S3072, the No Coffee Tax Act. The bill seeks to exempt from the President's IEEPA tariffs only a single commodity, coffee. I agree with my colleagues that tariffs generally should be targeted as much as possible to avoid harm to Americans. We also should consider more exemptions to address the harms arising from potential unintended consequences, including exemptions for unavailable natural resources. The administration agrees. The very recent trade deals with Cambodia and Malaysia explicitly exempt coffee and some other mostly unavailable natural resources from the reciprocal tariffs. By all accounts, the administration is working to identify similar exemptions in other active trade negotiations. I strongly encourage the President to pursue productive courses of engagement with U.S. stakeholders in doing so. Voting for one-off exemptions on the Senate floor in isolation of a larger negotiating strategy and broader stakeholder concerns, like S3072 asks us to do so now, does not facilitate a predictable process for our negotiators or for any broader segment of the stakeholder engagement. Therefore, I object. And Mr. President,
Objection is heard.
I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Nevada.
Thank you. I have a lot of respect for my colleague from Idaho, and I appreciate his comments. I respectfully disagree. And I do think that we have to consider, as the negotiations are taking place, as my colleague talked about, the administration is engaging in, how long will that take? I know the USMCA took at least 2 to 3 years, and that was just 2 countries, Mexico and Canada, that we were trying to negotiate with. While this administration goes through this indiscriminate negotiation without any involvement from Congress, what am I to tell my businesses back home? Those businesses, those coffee shops that close, those individual breakfast restaurants that are there that are passing off the cost to the consumer, how long do they have to wait until they get an answer from this administration? And that's why this commodity, this particular product, there had never been a tariff on it before, because 99% of the coffee that we consume comes from out of the country. So it really is having a devastating impact on our small businesses, and they really shouldn't be used as leverage in a negotiation tactic for this reason. I appreciate the comments, however, from my colleague from Idaho. Thank you, Mr. President.